You are one of over 8 billion people standing on a rock that's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, hurtling through space at 67,000 miles an hour, orbiting a star that is itself moving at nearly 500,000 miles per hour. Our whole galaxy, the Milky Way, has been around for about 13.6 billion years, inside a universe that's just a little bit older at 13.8 billion. It is a scale of time and space so vast it defies easy comprehension. And yet, here you are, a tiny, fleeting, but incredibly significant part of it all. A momentary consciousness in the grand cosmic ocean. So, how did we get here? How did we go from scattered stardust to sprawling cities, from chipping away at flint to splitting the atom and connecting the globe with invisible signals? To understand our present and maybe even glimpse our future, we have to go way, way back to the very beginning of everything. Before people, before dinosaurs, before the Earth itself, there was nothing we would recognize. No space, no time. Then, for reasons we may never fully comprehend, there was a beginning. Out of a point of unimaginable heat and density, the universe was born in an event we call the Big Bang. In less than a second, it expanded from smaller than an atom to larger than a galaxy. A chaotic, searingly hot inflation of energy, space, and time itself. For the first few minutes, it was a cosmic soup of fundamental particles. As it expanded, it cooled just enough for protons and neutrons to form. After a few 100,000 years, it cooled further, allowing these particles to combine, forming the first, simplest atoms, hydrogen and helium. The universe became transparent, and light could finally travel freely. This first light is still detectable today as a faint glow across the entire sky. The cosmic microwave, background radiation, a fossil echo of the universe's birth. But the universe was not uniform. Tiny fluctuations in density meant that some areas had slightly more matter and therefore slightly more gravity. Gravity, the universe's patient and relentless sculptor, began to pull these clouds of hydrogen and helium together. Over millions of years, the clouds grew denser and hotter. The pressure and temperature at their cores became so intense that they ignited, fusing atoms together and releasing tremendous energy. The first stars were born, lighting up the cosmos. These stars were gargantuan element factories. In their fiery hearts, they fused hydrogen and helium into heavier elements: carbon, oxygen, iron. When these massive stars reached the end of their lives, they died in spectacular explosions called supernova, scattering the new, heavier elements they had forged across space. It was this stardust, enriched with the building blocks of planets and life. that formed the next generation of stars and solar systems. Our solar system was one of them. It began as a vast, swirling cloud of gas and dust until about 4.5 billion years ago, when the gravity at its center pulled most of the material inward, collapsing to form our sun. The leftover bits of dust and gas orbiting the new star began to clump together. Dust became pebbles. Pebbles became rocks. Rocks became planetesimals. And planetesimals collided and merged to form the planets, including this one. For its first 500 million years, an era we call the Hadi Eon, Earth was a hot, violent mess. It was a molten world, constantly bombarded by asteroids and comets left over from the solar system's formation. One of these impacts from a Mars-sized object named They was so cataclysmic that it blasted a huge chunk of Earth's mantle into orbit, which then coalesced to form our moon. Eventually, the bombardment slowed and the planet began to cool. Steam that had been locked in volcanic eruptions condensed and fell as rain and water delivered by comets accumulated. For millions of years, it rained, forming a vast, global ocean. And in that primordial ocean, perhaps in sunlit, shallow pools, or clustered around superheated hydrothermal vents deep on the seafloor, something incredible and mysterious happened. Life. The first life forms were simple, single-celled organisms, prokaryotes, just floating, absorbing nutrients and multiplying. For 2 billion years, that was pretty much the whole story. Photosynthesis. It used sunlight to make energy, and its waste product was oxygen. Over hundreds of millions of years, this oxygen filled the atmosphere in what's called the Great Oxidation Event. It was toxic to most other life, causing a mass extinction. But it also paved the way for a new, more complex kind of cell, too. Thrived the eukaryotic cell, which could use that oxygen for energy. This led, eventually, to an explosion of diverse, multicellular life. Fast forward through eons of evolutionary trial and error, past the Cambrian explosion of new body plans, past the age of giant reptiles and world-altering asteroids, the rise of mammals. The rise of mammals. After an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, these small, shrew-like creatures came out of the shadows. Among them, a group of primates in Africa began to show remarkable adaptability. They moved from the trees to the savanna, and in doing so, began to walk on 2 legs. This was a total game changer. Bipedalism freed up their hands. These hands, guided by a rapidly growing brain, began to do something no other animal had done with such intention and skill. they crafted tools. First came the old-on choppers of Homo habilis, the handy man. Then came the more sophisticated hand axes of Homo erectus, who also learned to control fire. This is the dawn of the Stone Age and the emergence of early humans, or hominins. The key development, the thing that set our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, apart, wasn't just better tools, but what historians call the cognitive revolution. Roughly 70,000 years ago, something changed in our brains. We developed complex, flexible language. This wasn't just about yelling, "Hey, a lion." It was the ability to talk about things that weren't there, to describe the past and plan for the future, to tell stories, to create myths, God's laws, and shared fictions. This ability to unite behind abstract ideas allowed for cooperation on a scale never seen before, enabling us to form large tribes that could outcompete all other human species. We mastered fire, not just for warmth and protection, but as a social hub, a place to cook food, which unlocked more calories and gave us more energy for our power-hungry brains. Armed with these new superpowers of cooperation and communication, Homo sapiens began to spread. From their origin in Africa, they migrated generation by generation. They walked into Asia, following coastlines and herds. Technologies to survive colder climates, eventually crossing the frozen land bridge of Beringia into the Americas. They built boats and sailed to Australia, becoming the first large mammals to reach the continent. They were the planet's new and final human pioneers, adapting to every climate you can imagine, from scorching deserts to frozen tundras. For tens of thousands of years, humanity lived as hunter-gatherers. Life was nomadic, lived in small, egalitarian bands, its rhythms dictated entirely by the seasons and the movement of animals. Then, starting around 12,000 years ago, another revolution began, so profound it would change the very nature of our species. It didn't happen everywhere at once, but popped up independently in at least 7 different places, including the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, the Yangtze and Yellow River basins in China, and in Central and South America. We call it the Neolithic Revolution. Someone, somewhere, figured out that if you drop a seed in the ground, a plant grows. A simple observation with monumental consequences. Instead of chasing food, we could now create it. Agriculture was born. Animals like goats, sheep, and cattle were domesticated. For the first time, humans could settle down. Villages sprouted. Food surpluses could be stored. The population boomed. The world would never be the same. Settling down created a whole new set of opportunities and problems. When you have thousands of people living together, you need rules, you need organization. You need leaders to manage surplus food and soldiers to protect it. And so, out of the successful villages, the first cities and the first civilizations were born. The cradle of this new way of life was Mesopotamia, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq. Here, the Sumerians built some of the world's first true cities, like Uruk, which by 3000 BCE was home to tens of thousands of people. They were a ridiculously inventive bunch. To manage their new, complex society, they developed the world's first system of writing, cuneiforma, series of wedge-shaped marks pressed into wet clay tablets with a reed stylus. What started as a way to record grain harvests soon exploded into a medium for poetry, letters, and law. Suddenly, knowledge could be recorded, accumulated, and passed down. History could be written. They also invented the wheel, not for transport initially, but for pottery, and developed sophisticated math based on the number 60, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute, and 360 degrees in a circle too. Manage harvests and build their massive temples called ziggurats. They created early law codes, like the Code of Yurnamu, though the most famous and complete from the region is the later Code of Hammurabi from Babylon, which bluntly stated the rules and the often brutal punishments for breaking them, famously establishing the principle of an eye for an eye. Meanwhile, another great civilization was rising along the Nile River in Egypt. The Nile's predictable annual flood made its banks incredibly fertile, allowing for a bounty of crops. Unlike the chaotic, competing city-states of Mesopotamia, Egypt was unified early on, around 3100 BCE, under a single ruler, the pharaoh, who was considered a living god on earth. This centralized power, combined with a belief in an eternal afterlife, allowed for incredible feats of engineering. Most notably, the pyramid's colossal tombs, built to ensure the pharaoh's safe journey to the afterlife, filled with everything they would need. They developed their own intricate writing system, hieroglyphics, and made huge strides in medicine, astronomy, and government, creating a remarkably stable and conservative culture that lasted for nearly 3,000 years. But civilization wasn't just a Middle Eastern thing. It was popping up all over. In what is now Pakistan and India, the Indus Valley civilization flourished. They built cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa with astonishingly advanced urban planning, including grid-like streets, residential and commercial districts, and sophisticated water and drainage systems that included the world's first known urban sanitation systems. Frustratingly for us, we still haven't deciphered their script, so their politics, religion, and social structure remain shrouded in mystery. Over in China, civilization emerged along the Yellow River, with the rise of the Shang and then the Zhou dynasties. They perfected bronze casting, creating beautiful and intricate ritual vessels used in ceremonies to honor their ancestors. They also developed a unique system of writing on what are known as oracle bones, where questions were written on turtle shells or ox bones, which were then heated until they cracked, with the cracks being interpreted as answers from the ancestors. This writing system evolved directly into modern Chinese characters. Most importantly, the Zhou dynasty introduced a philosophical concept that would dominate Chinese politics for millennia: the mandate of heaven. This was the idea that a ruler's power was granted by the gods as long as they ruled justly and maintained harmony. If a ruler became corrupt or incompetent, and disasters like floods or famines struck, it was a sign they had lost a mandate, justifying their overthrow by a new dynasty. And this was happening independently all over the world. In the Americas, civilizations like the Olmecs in Mesoamerica were carving giant, multi-tone stone heads with remarkable precision, for reasons we still don't fully understand. In South America, cultures like the Chavin emerged in the Andes, creating religious centers that drew pilgrims from hundreds of miles away. It seems that once agriculture was established, the path to cities, social hierarchies, writing, and monumental architecture was an almost universal human response. This era also saw the birth of foundational belief systems that still shape our world. In India, the collection of texts known as the Vedas began to be composed, forming the roots of Hinduism. Later, Buddhism would emerge from this same cultural milieu, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who taught a path to enlightenment and the end of suffering. In the Middle East, a radical new idea took hold among a semi-nomadic people called the Hebrews: monotheism, the belief in a single, all-powerful, transcendent God. This was the foundation of Judaism, which recorded its history and laws in the Torah, and would in turn become the bedrock for two other major world religions, Christianity and Islam. The ancient world wasn't just building cities of brick and stone. It was building the invisible architecture of our modern minds. The foundations laid by those first civilizations gave way to an era of unprecedented scale and ambition, the age of classical empires. These weren't just city-states or regional kingdoms. They were vast, multicultural, multi-ethnic powerhouses that connected huge swaths of the planet, administered by complex bureaucracies and held together by powerful armies. In Persia, modern-day Iran, kings like Cyrus the Great forged the Achaemenid Empire, the largest the world had yet seen. It stretched from India in the east to Egypt and the coast of Greece in the west. The Persians were brilliant administrators. Instead of just brutally conquering and oppressing, Cyrus established a model of relative tolerance, allowing conquered peoples like the Jews to return to their homeland and practice their own religions. The empire was divided into provinces called satrapies, each run by a governor or satrap, who was watched by a network of spies called the king's eyes and ears to ensure loyalty. They built the Royal Road, a highway over 1,600 miles long, with postal stations that allowed for rapid communication and trade, and they standardized coinage and weights, creating a truly connected and governable empire. To their west, on the rocky shores of the Aegean Sea, a different experiment was unfolding in Greece. It was a collection of over 1,000 fiercely independent city-states, or palaeus, most famously the disciplined, militaristic society of Sparta, and the creative, commercial hub of Athens. The Greeks argued constantly, fought wars with each other, and yet shared a common language and religion. In doing so, they gave the world incredible gifts. In Athens, the idea of democracy rule by the people was born, though it was limited to free male citizens. Philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle began to ask fundamental questions about truth, justice, ethics, and the nature of reality, laying the groundwork for all of Western philosophy. They invented drama, both tragedy and comedy, wrote epic poems like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and pushed the boundaries of art and architecture with a focus on balance and idealized forms. Their golden age was brief, and their constant infighting, particularly the devastating Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, left them vulnerable. A kingdom to their north, Macedonia, took over. Its king, Alexander the Great, then harnessed Greek military power and went on a 10-year conquering spree, taking the entire Persian Empire and pushing all the way to India. His own empire didn't last, shattering shortly after his death. But in his wake, he spread Greek culture, Hellenism, creating a new, blended civilization that stretched across the Middle East. And then there was Rome. What started as a small, unremarkable city-state on the Italian peninsula grew into the most dominant and influential empire of the ancient world. After overthrowing their king in 509 BCE, they established a republic, a system of government where citizens elected officials to represent them. It was a system that would later inspire the founding fathers of the United States. They were relentless and pragmatic, absorbing territory through methodical conquest and clever diplomacy, granting citizenship to conquered peoples to ensure their loyalty. internal strife, civil wars between powerful generals like Julius Caesar and Pompey eventually led to the end of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire under its first emperor, Augustus. For the next 2 centuries, the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, prevailed. The empire, stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia, was a marvel of engineering and law. They built over 50,000 miles of high-quality, paved roads, massive aqueducts to bring fresh water to their cities, and colossal structures like the Colosseum for public entertainment. Roman law, with its principles like a person being innocent until proven guilty, became the foundation for many modern legal systems. But the empire's vast size eventually became its undoing. It was plagued by internal decay, crippling inflation, political instability with a constant succession of murdered emperors, and ever-increasing pressure from migrating tribes along its borders. In the 5th century CE, the western half of the empire finally collapsed, an event that traditionally marks the end of ancient history in Europe. While Rome dominated the West, other massive empires thrived in the East. In India, the Mauryan Empire united most of the subcontinent for the first time. Its greatest ruler, Ashoka, after witnessing the horrific slaughter of a bloody battle, converted to Buddhism and renounced military conquest. He promoted a message of peace, tolerance, and ethical governance, which he had carved on pillars and rocks throughout his empire. Much later, the Gupta Empire ushered in a golden age for India, a period of remarkable achievements in science, art, and mathematics. It was here that Indian mathematicians developed the concept of zero as a number, and the decimal system, a revolutionary idea that would eventually, slowly, change the world. In China, after a period of warring states, the Han Dynasty came to power and ruled for over 400 years. This was a golden age of such prosperity, unity, and cultural identity that many Chinese people today still call themselves Han Chinese. They established a strong, centralized government run by a professional bureaucracy, where officials were chosen not by birth, but through rigorous civil service exams based on their knowledge of Confucian philosophy. The Han Dynasty also formally established the Silk Road. Not a single road, but a network of trade routes that connected China all the way to the Roman Empire. For the first time, goods, ideas, religions, and even diseases were being exchanged on a massive, intercontinental scale. Luxury goods, like Chinese silk, flowed west, while Roman glassware flowed east. But ideas traveled too. Most significantly, Buddhism flowed east along the Silk Road into China, where it would become one of the country's major religions. For the first time, the great empires of the world were connected. The world was shrinking. With the fall of Western Rome, the world entered a period of profound change and reorganization. In Europe, this is often called the Middle Ages or the medieval period. Without Rome's central authority, its vast road network and trade routes fell into disrepair. The continent fragmented into a patchwork of smaller, competing kingdoms. A new social and political system, feudalism, emerged. In this system, kings granted land to powerful nobles in exchange for military service. These nobles, in turn, allowed peasants or serfs to work the land in exchange for protection and a share of the harvest. It was a hierarchical, rural, and often violent time. The one institution that provided a sense of unity across Western Europe was the Roman Catholic Church, headed by the Pope in Rome. The Church became not just a spiritual authority, but a major political, economic, and cultural power, owning vast amounts of land and influencing kings and commoners alike. But while Europe was decentralizing, a new dynamic power exploded out of the Arabian Peninsula. In the early 7th century, a merchant named Muhammad began receiving revelations that he believed came from God. These revelations, recorded in the Quran, became the foundation of a new monotheistic religion, Islam, inspired by the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Arab armies, unified under the banner of Islam, created a massive empire in a remarkably short time, stretching from Spain in the west to the borders of India in the east. This wasn't just a military conquest, it was a cultural one. The 8th to the 14th century is known as the Islamic Golden Age. While much of Europe had lost touch with the works of ancient Greek philosophers and scientists, Islamic scholars in vibrant, multicultural cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba obsessively translated, studied, and expanded upon them. They made breathtaking advances in mathematics, developing algebra and popularizing the Hindu-Arabic numerals we use today. They pioneered new techniques in medicine, astronomy, and chemistry. This preservation and expansion of knowledge in the Islamic world would later be instrumental in fueling Europe's own Renaissance. Farther east, China was hitting its own golden ages under the Tang and Song dynasties. This was a period of incredible invention and prosperity. They developed woodblock printing, making books more affordable and accessible, and later, movable type. They invented gunpowder, initially for fireworks and medicine, though its military use would soon become obvious. And they perfected the magnetic compass, which would revolutionize sea travel across the globe. The Song dynasty, in particular, saw a booming economy, a growing merchant class, and the world's most populous and advanced cities. Back in Europe, a newly confident and expansionist church launched the Crusades, a series of religious wars beginning in 1095, with the stated goal of reclaiming the Holy Land from Muslim rule, while largely a military failure in the long run. the Crusades had a huge, unintended impact. They brought Europeans into direct contact with the advanced economies and cultures of the Middle East, reintroducing lost knowledge from the classical world and creating a powerful demand for Eastern goods like spices, silks, and sugar. Then, in the 13th century, a new and terrifying force erupted from the steppes of Central Asia, the Mongols. Led by the brilliant and brutal Genghis Khan and his successors, they forged the largest contiguous land empire in world history, stretching from China to Eastern Europe. Their conquests were marked by staggering violence and destruction, but by unifying such a vast area under a single rule, they also created a period of relative stability known as the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. They made the Silk Road safer than it had ever been. Trade flourished, and travelers like Marco Polo could journey from Europe to China, once again connecting East and West. But this unprecedented interconnectedness had a terrifying downside. Traveling along these same trade routes, hidden in the fleas on the backs of rats, was a microscopic stowaway, the bacterium Yersinia pestis. The result was the Black Death, a horrific pandemic that swept across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe in the mid-14th century. It killed a staggering percentage of the population, by some estimates, 30% to 60% of everyone in Europe. The plague didn't just cause death, it caused massive social and economic upheaval. Labor became scarce, empowering peasants to demand wages and freedom, which shook the foundations of feudalism. Faith was shattered, as the church could offer no explanation or solace. The world was irrevocably altered. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, civilizations were flourishing in complete isolation. The Maya, in Mesoamerica, had built stunning cities with towering pyramids, developed a complex hieroglyphic writing system, and created an incredibly accurate calendar based on precise astronomical observations. In the Andes Mountains of South America, the Inca Empire was building a massive, highly organized state, connected by an elaborate road system without the use of wheels or riding. And in central Mexico, the Aztec Empire rose to prominence, building their magnificent capital, Tenochtitlan, a city of canals and temples, right in the middle of a lake. These vibrant, complex worlds had no idea what was about to come sailing over the horizon. The aftermath of the Black Death, the crumbling of the old feudal order, and the renewed contact with the East spurred dramatic change in Europe. A new wealthy merchant class was on the rise in city-states like Florence and Venice, flush with cash from the eastern trade routes. Fueled by this wealth and a rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman art and literature knowledge, preserved and enhanced by Islamic scholars and brought west by fleeing Byzantine intellectuals. The Renaissance, or rebirth, began in Italy. It was a flowering of art, science, and humanism. A philosophy that shifted focus from divine matters to human potential and achievement. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo created timeless masterpieces of breathtaking realism, while thinkers began to challenge old assumptions about the world. This new spirit of inquiry, combined with crucial technologies like the magnetic compass from China, the astrolabe perfected in the Islamic world, and a new ship design, the caravel, propelled the age of exploration. European kingdoms, especially Portugal and Spain, were desperate to find their own sea routes to the lucrative spice islands of Asia, causing the Italian and Muslim merchants who controlled the overland trade. In 1492, an Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus, backed by the Spanish monarchy, sailed west hoping to find a new route to Asia. Instead, he bumped into the Americas. This moment would irrevocably connect the two hemispheres and kickstart a new and truly global era. What followed was the Columbian Exchange, one of the most significant and disruptive events in human history. It was a massive transfer of plants, animals, technology, culture, and tragically, life-changing crops like potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and chili peppers went from the Americas to the rest of the world, transforming diets and fueling population growth. Horses, cattle, pigs, and wheat came to the Americas, reshaping their ecology. But so did diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which the indigenous populations had no immunity. These diseases swept through the continents, wiping out an estimated 90% of the Americas, a demographic catastrophe on an unimaginable scale, which made European conquest vastly easier. This discovery led to vast European colonial empires. Spain and Portugal carved up the Americas, growing fantastically wealthy from the extracted gold and silver from mines in places like Potosi, operated with forced indigenous labor. This wealth, however, was built on a brutal exploitation of native populations and, increasingly, on the forced labor of enslaved Africans. The Atlantic slave trade, a horrific system that predates this era, but expanded massively to meet the labor demands of sugar, cotton, and tobacco plantations, forcibly transported an estimated 12 million Africans to the Americas in the most inhumane conditions imaginable. It inflicted unimaginable suffering, reshaped the economies and demographics of the Americas and Europe, and left a legacy of systemic racism that persists to this day. Back in Europe, the universal authority of the Catholic Church was shattered. In 1517, a German monk and theologian named Martin Luther, disgusted by what he saw as corruption in the Church, particularly the selling of indulgences, nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg. This act, amplified by the relatively new invention of the printing press, sparked the Protestant Reformation. Christianity splintered into a myriad of new denominations. The Reformation was not just a religious event, it was a political one, as kings and princes chose sides to increase their own power, leading to over a century of brutal religious wars that tore Europe apart. Amidst this turmoil, another revolution was quietly brewing: the scientific revolution. Thinkers like Nicolaus Copernicus and Galileo Galilei challenged the ancient church-sanctioned belief that the Earth was the center of the universe, facing fierce opposition for their heliocentric model. Sir Isaac Newton later developed his laws of motion and universal gravitation, describing the universe as a great, predictable machine governed by knowable mathematical laws. This was a profound shift. The world was no longer just a place of divine mystery, but a rational system that could be observed, measured, and understood through experimentation and reason. The scientific method was born, providing a powerful new tool for understanding reality. While Europe was an upheaval, powerful, centralized gunpowder empires dominated elsewhere. The Ottoman Empire, centered in Turkey, controlled the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Eastern Europe. The Mughal Empire ruled most of India, producing stunning architecture like the Taj Mahal, and in China, the Ming Dynasty was replaced by the Qing Dynasty, which would rule until the early 20th century. For a time, these empires were among the most powerful and sophisticated in the world. But the scientific, economic, and military revolutions taking place in Europe were beginning to shift the tide of global power. The scientific revolution didn't just change how we saw the stars, it changed how we saw ourselves. During a period in the 18th century known as the Enlightenment, thinkers applied the principles of reason and scientific inquiry to human society, government, and religion. Philosophers like John Locke in England argued that people had natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that government's legitimacy came from the consent of the governed. In France, Voltaire championed free speech and religious tolerance, while Rousseau wrote about the social contract between people and their rulers. These were radical, dangerous ideas. They fundamentally challenged the centuries-old order of absolute monarchy and the divine right of kings. And these ideas soon exploded into action. In 1776, American colonists, fed up with British taxes and a lack of representation, and inspired by Enlightenment ideals, declared their independence. The American Revolution resulted in the creation of the United States, a new kind of nation founded not on shared ancestry, but on the principles of liberty, and self-governance. Their success sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted. Facing bankruptcy and widespread famine, the common people of France rose up against their king. Louis XVI and the aristocracy, executing them and establishing a republic under the revolutionary banner of liberty, equality, fraternity. Though it descended into the paranoia and bloodshed of the Reign of Terror and ultimately led to the rise of the military dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. Its ideals of popular sovereignty and individual rights would inspire countless others. Revolutions swept across Latin America as colonies, led by figures like Simon Bolivar, won their independence from Spain and Portugal. The old world of kings and subjects was starting to crumble. At the exact same time, another revolution was beginning. One that would be just as consequential, if not more so, the Industrial Revolution. It started in Great Britain with a series of technological breakthroughs. The development of an efficient steam engine by James Watt was key. It could be used to power factory machines for the mass production of textiles and other goods. And it powered locomotives and steamboats, shrinking the world and making it possible to transport goods and people faster and cheaper than ever before. People flocked from the countryside to rapidly growing cities to work in the new factories. For the first time in the history of these industrializing nations, more people began to live in cities than in rural areas. Tipping point, the world as a whole wouldn't reach until the early 21st century. This new industrial economy created incredible wealth for a new class of industrialists and entrepreneurs, but it also led to horrific working conditions. Low wages, child labor, overcrowded and unsanitary cities, and new social tensions between the factory owners and the working class. The Industrial Revolution gave European nations and the United States immense economic and military power, which fueled a new and more aggressive wave of imperialism. Armed with new technologies like the machine gun and the steamship, industrialized nations could now project their power into the heart of continents that had previously been inaccessible. In the scramble for Africa, European powers met in Berlin in 1884 and carved up almost the entire continent amongst themselves, with no regard for the ethnic or linguistic groups on the ground. Britain tightened its grip on India, making it the jewel in the crown of its empire. China, once a global superpower, was weakened and forced open to Western trade through the Opium Wars. By 1900, a handful of Western powers controlled a vast portion of the planet. The world was more connected than ever, but it was a connection built on a foundation of domination and profound inequality. The 20th century arrived on a wave of technological optimism and imperial arrogance. Science was unlocking the universe's deepest secrets. New technologies like the telephone, the automobile, and the airplane were changing daily life. But the same industrial power that built skyscrapers and ocean liners would soon be turned to destruction on a scale never before imagined. The complex web of empires, militaristic nationalism, secret alliances, and colonial rivalries finally snapped in the summer of 1914. The assassination of an Austrian archduke in Sarajevo acted as a spark that ignited the powder keg. The great powers of Europe stumbled into World War I. This was a new kind of war-industrialized slaughter, with machine guns that mowed down soldiers in waves, heavy artillery that pulverized landscapes, poison gas, and tanks. The Great War was meant to be over by Christmas, but instead it dragged on for 4 bloody years, shattering a generation and leading to the collapse of 4 empires: the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, and the Ottoman. After the war, the world tried to build a lasting peace through the League of Nations. But the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles imposed on Germany, combined with the global economic collapse of the Great Depression in the 1930s, created a perfect storm of anger, desperation, and instability. This allowed extremist, anti-democratic ideologies to take hold. Fascism in Italy under Mussolini, Nazism in Germany under Adolf Hitler, and militarism in Japan. In 1939, the world plunged into conflict again. World War II was even more global and far more destructive than the first. It was a total war in which the line between soldier and civilian was erased. It saw unimaginable atrocities, culminating in the Holocaust, the systematic, industrial-scale genocide of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime, along with millions of other minorities, and it ended with the use of the ultimate weapon, the atomic bomb, dropped by the United States on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By the time the war ended in 1945, tens of millions of people were dead, and much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. In the ashes of the war, a new global order was created. The United Nations was formed, a successor to the League of Nations, with a mission to prevent another such catastrophe. But the world also immediately split between 2 new superpowers. With opposing ideologies and ambitions, the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. This began the Cold War, a 45-year standoff of geopolitical tension. Proxy wars fought across the globe in places like Korea and Vietnam, and a terrifying nuclear arms race, all under the constant shadow of mutually assured destruction. This period also saw the final dramatic end of the great European empires as powerful independence movements across Africa and Asia, inspired by leaders like Mahatma Gandhi in India, succeeded in throwing off colonial rule, creating dozens of new nations. Then, in 1991, weighed down by economic stagnation and popular discontent, the Soviet Union collapsed, ending the Cold War. But the defining revolution of the late 20th century was technological. The invention of the microprocessor in the 1970s put the power of a computer onto a tiny silicon chip. This led to the personal computer and eventually the creation of the Internet and the World Wide Web. Computers that once filled entire rooms could now fit in our pockets. The Internet connected the globe in a way that was previously unimaginable, transforming communication, commerce, culture, and politics in the span of a single generation. And that brings us to now, to you, sitting here, perhaps watching this on a handheld device that holds more computing power than all of NASA had during the Apollo missions to the moon. In the blink of a cosmic eye, we went from small bands of hunter-gatherers huddled around a fire to over 8 billion people living in a globally interconnected civilization. The epic of our species, a story of cooperation and brutal conflict, of breathtaking innovation and devastating destruction, of slowly building knowledge and of sudden world-shattering revolutions, has led to this exact moment. We face unprecedented species-level challenges, a changing climate driven by the very industrial engine that built our modern world, the threat of global pandemics in our hyper-connected society, and the dizzying dangers of the powerful technologies we've created, from artificial intelligence to genetic engineering. But we also have an unprecedented capacity for connection, communication, and collective learning. The history of the world is a long and complex story with no single, simple lesson. But if there is one constant, it is change. The story is not over. It is still being written. And what happens next? Well, that's the part we get to write together.